There's a certain horror we don't talk about, a type of evil that doesn't have the face of a monster, but the face of a child. A child sitting at the dinner table, laughing, playing, looking into the eyes of the very people who raised them while quietly plotting their deaths. You see, there's a reason we're drawn to stories like this, because they break something deep inside us, something primal. The idea that home is safe, that family is forever, that blood somehow means loyalty. But what happens when that belief is shattered? What happens when the person who tucks you in at night is the one you choose to kill? This isn't about teenage rebellion. This isn't about anger in the heat of the moment. This is about children, some just barely into adolescence, who made a conscious decision to end the lives of their own parents. Some did it for love, some did it for freedom, others just want to see what it felt like. And what's even more disturbing, many of them didn't regret it. Take a moment to think about that. A child capable of murder, not in a video game, not in a horror film, but in real life. A child who walks through the house one last time, picks up a knife, a gun, a hammer, walks into their parents' bedroom, and doesn't flinch. What kind of mind does that? Science will tell you it's a mix of things: brain development, trauma, personality disorders, lack of impulse control. But science can't explain the coldness, the calculation, the emptiness. These kids weren't just lost. They weren't just hurt. They were something else entirely. Tonight, you're going to hear 5 stories, 5 lives taken, 5 homes destroyed, and 5 children, some now adults, who crossed the darkest line imaginable. There's Jasmine Richardson, who slaughtered her entire family for the love of a man twice her age and smiled in court. Tyler Hadley, who beat his parents to death with a hammer, then threw the most infamous house party in Florida. Sarah Johnson, the golden girl of her town, who executed her parents in their own home, all for a secret relationship and a future that never came. And others, whose names you may not know, but whose crimes you'll never forget. These aren't just true crime cases. They're psychological horror stories, real-life nightmares in which innocence was a mask and murder was a motive. You may want to turn away. You may want to tell yourself these kids were just sick, broken, different from your own. But be careful, because evil doesn't always come in the form you expect. Sometimes it looks like a smiling teenager with blood on their hands. This is the most evil kids who killed their parents. Case 1. Jasmine Richardson, the 12-year-old who slaughtered her family for love. On the surface, Medicine Hat was a picture-perfect town. Quiet, small, tucked away in the Canadian prairies. The kind of place where doors were left unlocked and neighbors waved from their driveways. But all of that changed one spring morning, when a 6-year-old boy looked through his friend's window and saw a body covered in blood. The police arrived minutes later. Inside the Richardson family home, they found a scene so brutal, so raw it felt like something out of a horror film. Mark and Deborah Richardson were both dead, stabbed multiple times, their blood soaked into the carpet. In the upstairs bedroom lay the body of their 8-year-old son, Jacob. His throat had been slit. He was still clutching a toy lightsaber. But something didn't add up. Their 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine, was missing. At first, police feared the worst, a kidnapping. But then, they looked closer. There were no signs of forced entry. No struggle. No blood trail leading away from a house. And then they checked Jasmine's computer. That's where they found him, Jeremy Steinke, a 23-year-old man with a fascination for blood, vampires, and death. He called himself a 300-year-old werewolf, wore a vial of blood around his neck. And most disturbingly, he was Jasmine's boyfriend. Yes, a 12-year-old girl and a 23-year-old man. The two had met on a goth website called Vampire Freaks. In their chats, they shared fantasies of killing Jasmine's parents, whom she said were ruining her life by trying to keep them apart. They quoted natural-born killers. They spoke about eloping, and they talked, often and in detail, about murder. Jasmine, I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you. Jeremy, I love your plan, but we need to get away with it. They didn't get away with it. Within 24 hours, police tracked them down. They were found laughing and kissing in a nearby town, hiding out in Jeremy's friend's truck. Neither of them seemed particularly shaken. In fact, Jeremy told one friend proudly, "She slits the little boy's throat, and I slaughtered the rest of them." And then, as if it was a joke, he added, "Their throats were so easy to cut, like slicing butter." The question that haunts everyone to this day is why? Was Jasmine brainwashed? Was she abused? Or was there something darker inside her all along? Her defense would later argue that she was manipulated, a victim of grooming by an older predator who convinced her that killing was the only way they could be together. But the evidence told a different story. It was Jasmine who first suggested killing her parents. It was Jasmine who stabbed her little brother to death while Jeremy finished off the adults. And it was Jasmine, not Jeremy, who smiled in court as if she didn't understand that 3 people were dead. The jury didn't see a confused little girl. They saw a remorseless child who murdered not just strangers, but her own blood. She was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. But because she was only 12 at the time, Canada's youngest convicted killer, the law was limited. Her sentence? 10 years. That's the maximum sentence allowed under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. She served part of it in a psychiatric facility, part in custody, and part under supervision in the community. In 2016, Jasmine walked free. Her record was wiped clean. Her name was changed. And legally, she no longer exists. But the dead are still dead. Mark and Deborah Richardson are buried side by side. Parents who died trying to protect their daughter from the one threat they never imagined, her. Jacob was buried clutching his toy lightsaber. His grave reads simply, "Our little hero." So what went wrong? Was it obsession, psychopathy, or the perfect storm of youth, manipulation, and delusion? Psychologists say Jasmine's sense of reality was distorted, but others believe she simply lacked empathy from the very beginning, that behind her wide eyes and teenage angst there was something hollow. Today, somewhere in Canada, Jasmine Richardson is living a new life. She could be working next to you, walking past you, serving you coffee. You wouldn't know. You couldn't know. But remember this, there's nothing more terrifying than evil that wears the face of a child, except maybe one that smiles while destroying everything it once called home. Case 2, Tyler Hadley, the killer party. Tyler Hadley was just 17 years old when he decided to kill his parents. There was no psychotic break, no sudden rage, no snapping point. He simply wanted to throw a party. And he knew his parents would never allow it. So he killed them. It was July 16th, 2011, a sweltering Saturday evening in Port St. Lucie, Florida. The kind of night where kids wander suburban streets in packs. Music spills from car windows and house parties the neighborhood like lights on a map. Tyler had invited everyone, not just his friends. Everyone. Dozens of kids came, some from down the block, some from across town. No one questioned why Tyler's house, normally locked up tight by his strict parents, was suddenly wide open with music blasting and drinks flowing. But behind the closed door of the master bedroom, his parents' bodies were hidden, beaten, bloodied, wrapped in towels, buried beneath debris. Tyler Hadley had murdered his mother and father just hours before the first guest arrived. His weapon of choice? A 22-inch framing hammer. He attacked his mother first, while she sat at her computer. He struck her in the head again and again until she collapsed. His father, hearing the screams, ran into the room and met the same fate. Then Tyler dragged their bodies into the bedroom, covered them in household items, broken furniture, clothes, even a coffee table, and locked the door. He cleaned up the visible blood as best he could. Then he sent out the invites. The party started around 9 p.m., and no one noticed a thing. They drank, they smoked, they played beer pong in the kitchen. One guest would later recall, it was a classic high school rager, loud, chaotic, packed. Tyler seemed chill, maybe a little off, but nothing crazy. What they didn't know was that Tyler had taken 3 ecstasy pills before the party. Not to get high, but to numb himself from what he'd done. He walked around the house, laughing, playing host, telling people they could crash there if they wanted. The entire time, his dead parents were decomposing behind a locked door just down the hall. But the most disturbing part? He kept hinting at it. Subtle at first. Dark jokes. Strange comments. Someone mentioned the smell in the house. Something sour, metallic. Tyler shrugged and said, "Oh, my parents are out of town." Then he added, "Actually, I killed them." Everyone laughed. They thought he was joking. But he wasn't. Later that night, Tyler pulled his best friend, Michael Mandel, into a separate room. He locked the door, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "I'm not joking. I really did it." Michael didn't believe him, not until Tyler showed him the bloodstains, a weapon, and finally, the bodies. He told Michael everything. How he stood behind his mother and raised the hammer. How she screamed, "Why?" before the first blow landed. How his father begged him to stop. How the sound of the hammer hitting skull was louder than he expected. How he washed the blood off himself, changed his clothes, and just kept going. Michael was in shock, but Tyler made him promise not to tell anyone. So he didn't. Not yet. The party raged on. Teenagers danced, laughed, took photos. Some even passed out on the couch, just feet away from the murder scene. All while Tyler Hadley sat silently in the corner, staring off into nothing, his mind lost in the gravity of what he'd done. Eventually, Michael couldn't take it. After the party ended, he called Crime Stoppers. Police arrived at 4:30 a.m. They found the bodies, the hammer, the blood, the quiet, eerie aftermath of a house that had seen something truly evil. Tyler Hadley was arrested on the spot. At first, he denied everything, but within hours, he confessed, not just to the murders, but to the plan, because it was a plan. He had been thinking about it for over 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He even posted to Facebook the morning of the murders, "Party at my crib tonight." Maybe carried a horrifying weight. Psychologists tried to make sense of him. They said Tyler suffered from depression, that he hated his parents' rules, that he felt invisible, isolated, unloved, that he wanted freedom, but didn't know how to get it. But those are explanations, not excuses, because most 17-year-olds fight with their parents. Most feel trapped at times. But Tyler Hadley took it a step further. He became something else. Something cold, detached, predatory. He murdered the two people who loved him most, not in a fit of rage, but with patience, with planning, with calculation. And then he invited 60 people over to celebrate. At his trial, the judge called it one of the most cold-blooded crimes he'd ever seen. Tyler showed no real remorse. His only regret, he once said, was getting caught. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Years later, he would try to appeal, but the court upheld the sentence. Today, Tyler Hadley sits in a Florida prison. He will never leave. The house in Port St. Lucie was demolished. The street is quiet again. The neighbors still don't like to talk about what happened. But ask anyone who was at that party, and they'll tell you in hushed voices how close they were to evil that night. How they danced while two corpses lay just feet away. How they laughed while a killer smiled. Because Tyler Hadley didn't just commit murder. He celebrated it. And in doing so, he became a chilling reminder that sometimes evil isn't a stranger lurking outside. Sometimes it's the quiet kid down the block, waiting for the right moment to strike. Case 3. Sarah Johnson, the perfect daughter turned killer. In the small town of Bellevue, Idaho, nestled in a quiet stretch of the Rocky Mountains, Alan and Diane Johnson thought they were raising the perfect daughter. 16 years old, blonde, bright-eyed, bubbly, polite at church, well-liked at school. She went to Bible study. She got good grades. She wore pink. But behind the bedroom door, behind the sweet smile and soft voice, Sarah Johnson was hiding a secret. And when her parents found out, she made a choice. Not to run away, not to confess, but to kill them. It was September 2nd, 2003, a Tuesday morning. Still dark out. Diane Johnson was in the shower. Her husband, Alan, was still in bed. Sarah walked quietly down the hall of their two-story home, carrying a rifle wrapped in a bathrobe. The weapon belonged to her older brother, a .264 caliber Winchester. Powerful, precise, lethal. She walked into the master bedroom and pulled the trigger. The first bullet struck Alan in the chest. It exploded through his heart, killing him instantly. Then she turned and walked into the bathroom. Her mother was still behind the curtain. She fired once. Through the head, the bullet tore through skull and brain. Diane collapsed. Sarah turned and calmly walked away. But it wasn't over yet. She took the rifle, walked out the back door, and threw it in the garbage. Then she took off her blood-spattered clothes and dumped them in the trash as well. Everything, down to the pink bathrobe she'd used to muffle the gun. Then she got dressed. She curled her hair, put on makeup, clean clothes, perfume. Then she walked out the front door, screaming. A neighbor heard her cries. The police arrived within minutes. They found 2 bodies, Alan, cold and still in bed. Diane, half in, half out of the shower, blood pooling across the bathroom tile. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. And then they noticed something strange. Sarah wasn't crying, not real tears. Anyway, her face was dry, her hands calm, her voice too controlled. But still, she played the part. She told police someone must have broken in. Maybe the brother of a boy she was dating. A Mexican immigrant named Bruno Santos. A 19-year older parents had forbidden her to see. She said her father had threatened to report him for statutory rape. She said maybe it was revenge, but police weren't convinced, especially when they found out that Sarah had been sneaking out to meet Bruno, lying, stealing, especially when they discovered she had been grounded, forbidden from using the phone, the internet, even from seeing her friends, and especially when they found the bathrobe, covered in gunshot residue, hidden in the trash just behind the house. And then there was a glove, latex, tucked into the trash alongside her bloody clothes. Inside, they found her DNA and gunshot residue embedded in the fibers. Sarah was arrested 2 days later. She didn't cry then either. In court, prosecutors painted the picture of a girl who wanted freedom, no matter the cost. A girl in love with a boy her parents didn't approve of. A girl obsessed with the idea of escape, of getting out, being on her own, living life by her own rules. A girl who believed her parents were standing in the way, so she erased them. Her defense argued she was innocent, that she was framed, that Bruno's brother might have done it, that she was just a scared, grieving child. But the evidence was too strong. The blood, the glove, the motive, even the way she behaved after murders, calculated, composed, eerily detached. At 17 years old, Sarah Johnson was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Her sentence? Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. She became one of the youngest people in Idaho history to be given that sentence. And she's still there, behind bars in a concrete cell. No makeup, no pink, no freedom. Today, Sarah Johnson is over 30. She's filed appeals, claimed new evidence, blamed others, but she's never admitted what she did, never spoken about why she pulled the trigger, why she fired that second shot. Was it love, rebellion, a sudden burst of rage? Or had she always been capable of smiling at her mother one moment and shooting her in the next? Alan and Diane Johnson had no enemies, no dangerous past, no reason to die, except for the one they raised. Because sometimes, evil doesn't start in the streets or the shadows. Sometimes, it grows inside your own home, fed by lies, fueled by obsession, and one day, it pulls the trigger. Case 4, Erin Caffey, the girl who ordered death. March 1st, 2008, Alba, Texas. A town so small, most people leave their doors unlocked at night. A town where nothing evil is supposed to happen. But evil did happen, and it came from someone they trusted the most, the 16-year-old preacher's daughter named Erin Caffey. She looked like every parent's dream. Soft-spoken, sweet, a piano player in the church choir, raised strict Baptist, homeschooled, sheltered. But beneath the surface, Erin was seething. She had fallen in love with Charlie Wilkinson, a 19-year-old boy who her parents, Terry and Penny Caffey, disapproved of. They said he was no good. They tried to separate them, forbidding phone calls, ending visits, locking down her world tighter and tighter. To Erin, it wasn't protection. It was prison, and she wanted out. Not just a runaway, not just a rebel. She wanted her parents dead. She talked about it often with Charlie. At first, he laughed it off, but Erin didn't stop. She didn't get scared. She didn't change her mind. She kept planting seeds. Until one night, she convinced him they would murder her entire family. Then they would be free to be together, forever. It was a plan so grotesque, so devoid of empathy, it barely seemed real. But it was, and it was coming to life. That night, armed with a .22 caliber pistol and a samurai sword, Charlie Wilkinson and his friend Charles Wade crept toward the Caffey home. Erin waited nearby in the getaway car, cold and quiet. At 2 a.m., they entered through the unlocked front door. Terry and Penny Caffey were asleep in their bed. The first shot shattered the silence. 4 bullets into Penny, 3 into Terry. Blood soaked the sheets. Penny died instantly. Terry, somehow, survived. He heard the men move down the hall, heard the soft creak of the wooden floorboards as they made their way toward his 2 youngest sons, 13-year-old Matthew and 8-year-old Tyler. He tried to move to stop them, but his body wouldn't respond. All he could do was listen to the screams, the pleading, the thuds. Matthew was shot point blank in the face. Tyler was hacked apart with a samurai sword. No mercy, no hesitation. After the murders, Charlie and Charles ransacked the house, stole whatever they could find, and set it ablaze, hoping to cover up the evidence. Then they fled, back to Erin, who was waiting for them to finish what she had set in motion. Meanwhile, Terry Caffey, bleeding, half-dead, somehow found the strength to crawl out of the burning wreckage. He stumbled through the woods, dragged himself 300 yards to a neighbor's house, collapsed on the porch, barely breathing. When the authorities arrived, Terry, broken and burned, gasped out the words that would shatter everything. "My daughter, Erin, she's missing. Find her." But Erin wasn't missing. She was at her boyfriend's trailer, wrapped in his arms, telling him how much she loved him, celebrating. Within hours, police pieced it together. Erin wasn't a victim. She was the architect, the girl who planned her family's slaughter because they told her no. She showed no signs of remorse. When officers arrested her, she didn't ask about her brothers. She didn't ask about her mother. She only asked one thing: "Is Charlie okay?" At her trial, the courtroom listened in stunned horror as the story unfolded. A story of manipulation, obsession, and betrayal so cold it barely seemed human. Terry Caffey, the lone survivor, sat in the front row, staring at the daughter who had tried to erase him from existence. He would later say, it was like looking at a stranger, like someone else had taken her place. Psychologists tried to explain Erin's mind. They said she was immature, impulsive, desperate for autonomy, that Charlie had manipulated her, that maybe, buried somewhere under the surface, she didn't fully understand the consequences. But the truth was colder than that. Erin wasn't out of control. She was methodical, calculating, focused. She used love as a weapon, twisted loyalty into violence. She wanted freedom, and she was willing to destroy everything that stood in her way to get it. Erin Caffey ultimately pled guilty to capital murder to avoid the death penalty. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 25 years. Charlie Wilkinson was also given life without parole. Charles Wade received a similar sentence for his part in the massacre. And their getaway driver, a girl named Bobby Johnson, who was just along for the ride, got 40 years. Erin was sent away to a women's prison in Gatesville, Texas. There, behind bars, she reinvented herself again, playing the role of the reformed sinner, quoting Bible verses, saying she's found God. But Terry Caffey knows better. He forgave her, because forgiveness, he says, is for the survivor, not the killer. But forgiveness doesn't erase the facts. It doesn't bring back Penny, or Matthew, or Tyler. It doesn't change that when faced with the walls of adolescence. Erin Caffey didn't just rebel. She burned her whole world to the ground. Because sometimes evil doesn't need horns and fangs. Sometimes it wears a pink hoodie, smiles sweetly, and waits for you to fall asleep. Case 5, Joshua Phillips, the boy with a monster in his closet. November 3rd, 1998, Jacksonville, Florida. The sun was shining. The neighborhood was quiet. Children played in yards. Parents raked leaves. Just another normal suburban day. But inside one home, a secret was rotting. Literally. Something foul had seeped into the air. A stench of death that wouldn't go away. It was coming from the bedroom of a 14-year-old boy named Joshua Phillips. To anyone who knew him, Joshua was a polite kid. The shy one. Good grades. No trouble. Lived with his parents in a clean, modest home. Played baseball. Kept to himself. But inside that bedroom, inside that locked wooden bed frame, was something straight out of a nightmare. The dead body of 8-year-old Maddie Clifton, wrapped in trash bags, hidden under his waterbed. Maddie had been missing for a week. The entire community searched for her. Flyers on poles, candlelight vigils, prayers. Her family was devastated. But all the while, her body was decomposing less than 150 feet from her front door in the home of a boy she called her friend. So, how did it happen? Why would a 14-year-old boy kill an innocent little girl? The answer is almost too disturbing to process. Joshua's parents were strict, especially his father, Steve Phillips, a controlling, volatile man who ruled the house with an iron fist. No friends over, no phone calls, no mistakes. Joshua lived in fear of him. On November 3rd, Joshua was home alone after school. His father was at work. His mother wouldn't be home for hours. That's when Maddie Clifton came to the door. She wanted to play baseball. Just for fun. Joshua hesitated. He knew his dad would be furious if he found out he had a girl over. But he let her in. They went into the backyard and started tossing the ball. Then it happened. He accidentally hit her in the eye with the bat. She started screaming, crying, loud, and Joshua panicked. Not like a child afraid he hurt someone, but like a criminal caught red-handed. He didn't check if she was okay. He didn't call for help. He dragged her inside, bleeding, sobbing, into his room. And then he beat her with the bat, hit her again and again until she stopped moving. That should have been the end. But it wasn't, because even as she lay unconscious, bleeding, gasping for air, she was still alive, and Joshua didn't want to get caught. So he opened the bed frame, shoved her inside, and left her there, still breathing, still struggling, still alive. Hours later, with his parents back home, he snuck into the room and stabbed her repeatedly in the chest, in the neck, to make sure she died. Then he sealed the frame and pretended nothing had happened. For 6 days, Joshua slept on top of that waterbed, with Maddie's corpse rotting inches beneath him, while search parties combed the woods, while Maddie's parents begged for help on television, while he smiled and nodded and handed out flyers. He knew exactly where she was, and he never said a word. It wasn't until his mother noticed a smell and found a wet stain leaking from the bed that she made the discovery. She opened the frame and screamed. What she found was something no parent should ever have to see. She called the police. Joshua was arrested within hours. In his confession, he didn't show rage. He didn't cry. He spoke in a flat, disconnected tone, like it had all been a bad dream. He said he didn't know why he did it. He said he was scared. But what kind of fear drives someone to bludgeon, suffocate, stab, and hide an innocent little girl? What kind of fear sleeps peacefully for 6 nights above the corpse of their friend? The court didn't buy his panic story. Neither did the jury. They saw a different picture. A boy who didn't just kill, he covered it up, leaked, manipulated, played innocent, and never once confessed until the evidence was unavoidable. Joshua Phillips was charged as an adult, found guilty of first-degree murder, sentenced to life in prison without parole. At 14 years old, he became one of the youngest Americans ever sentenced to die behind bars. Over the years, He's tried to appeal, claimed his sentence is too harsh, said his young brain wasn't fully developed. And yes, research does show teenage brains aren't like adult ones. But brains don't explain intent. Brains don't explain why he stabbed her after she was already dying. Brains don't explain why he could look a grieving mother in the face and lie. In 2017, he got a resentencing hearing. He begged for mercy. Maddie's family was there. They had only one message: don't let him out, because some things are too monstrous to ever be forgiven, too cold to be explained, too dark to ever fully understand. Today, Joshua Phillips sits in a Florida prison. He says he's reformed. He plays the model inmate, reads books, reflects, but none of that brings Maddie back. None of it erases the image of a child suffocating under a bed, crying for help, while the boys she trusted turn out the lights and shut the door. Because sometimes the scariest place in the world isn't the woods. It's not the basement. It's the bedroom down the hall. We want to believe that childhood is sacred, that kids are innocent, that evil has a face and it's grown hardened, corrupted by years of hate. But as you've just seen, that's not always the truth. Sometimes evil is young. It laughs, it plays, and then it kills. These cases aren't just shocking. They're reminders of a darker truth, that behind some of the most unthinkable crimes are children with blood on their hands. If these stories disturbed you, good. They should disturb you, because they force us to ask the questions we're too afraid to face. What creates a killer? Can evil be born? And how do you ever feel safe again when the monster might live in your own home? If this video gripped you, if you felt that chill down your spine, don't forget to hit that like button. It lets us know you want more deep dives into the darkest corners of human nature. Subscribe to True Crime Stories for more real-life horror tales. From killers hiding in plain sight to cases that defy logic, reason, and morality. And before you go, drop a comment below. Which of these cases haunted you the most? And do you think these killers were born evil or made? We'll be reading every single one. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who still sleep with the lights on.